You didn't want anybody to know. That whole stigma of, oh, that only happens to other people's kids. That's not going to happen to my kid. And you don't want anyone to know. So you don't tell anybody. And if you don't tell anybody, you can't get help. And if you can't get help, then it just gets worse. It's a terrible, terrible place to be.
The Onward podcast features authentic conversations on facing adversity and moving forward, and also discovering ourselves along the way. I am your host, Emily Harmon. Tina Smarch is my guest today, and Tina and I are discussing her son, Jacob. Her son, Jacob, passed away when he was 18 in 2016 of a drug overdose. And I really look forward to the day when I don't have to do interviews like this anymore, when there's no more parents losing their children to drug overdose. It's just heartbreaking. And I commend Tina for sharing her story, for sharing Jacob's story. Jacob wanted to be a counselor, and he can't do that now, but he's doing that through Tina, because Tina and her husband are helping so many people. Thank you, Tina, for sharing your story on the Onward podcast. Tina, welcome to the Onward podcast.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to talking with you. One of the things that we were just talking about before this interview that we have in common is you're getting ready to retire or graduate.
Yes, both maybe. Yes, into a new part of my life.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, 2 years ago when I retired, I called my retirement ceremony a graduation, because it really is. You're like finally graduating onto, you've got the world is your oyster again.
Right. And it's very similar to graduation, because when you graduate from something, there's that uncertainty that I'm kind of facing. But I mean, I'm looking forward to it, though. Don't get me wrong.
No, definitely. So when the end of May, is that?
Yes.
And after 35 years of being a teacher.
Yes.
What grades did you teach, or what grade?
Elementary and gifted certified. So I've taught everything, K through 5, really.
Wow.
No, yeah. Right now with 5th graders, wearing me out.
I'm sure it's really tough. COVID. Are you guys in the classroom?
I do both. So I have a teammate who, by the way, is her first year. But in the morning, I teach language arts, reading and writing to 22 in-person kids. And then we swap, and I teach language arts to the digital kids. And she does the math, science stuff. So
I see. Well, I appreciate it. People thank veterans all the time, and I'm a veteran, but thank you, because teachers play such a big role in our kids' lives and in the future of our country. And I think it's sometimes you're not really appreciated.
Well, this year's been tricky. It has all kinds of areas. So
yeah. Well, today we're talking about your son, Jacob. Go ahead. Tell us about Jacob.
Well, we have 4 kids between my husband and I. So there's 3 older girls. And then Jacob was the baby. Jacob passed away at the age of 18 from a drug overdose. And he, as a kid, was the comedian of the family. He was always making us laugh, and he was always playing jokes on people. And I think as being the baby and the only boy, he was a little spoiled, maybe just a tad, really smart. And then at about the age of 13 or 14, he actually started smoking pot. And really, we haven't exactly figured out how all this stuff got started, because he was also very good at keeping things to himself. But anyway, we think we figured out around 13 or 14, he started hanging out with some older friends and started smoking pot. And it was horrifying. Like, we were just horrified. How could you do this? Mom's a teacher, dad's a photographer. We're a good family, whatever you tell yourself. And eventually, well, it wasn't eventually, it was pretty quick. He got into different types of pills. We're not sure exactly where he was getting them, but the high school that we're districted for has a lot of families with a lot of money. We're not one of them, but a lot of families with a lot of money. And those pills would just come into the school. And before we knew it, we were finding Xanax and hydrocodones, and I don't even, everything.
I've
you could
heard
think.
that those are the kinds of things that are stolen in open houses. When people are selling their house, they have an open house. You got to watch your medicine cabinet because a lot of times people come in there and look for those kinds of pills. And there's a way that you can dispose of them too. I wouldn't flush them down the toilet, but typically you can take them back to a pharmacy. I know where I used to live, you could take them to the sheriff's office and just turn them in. And
And if several times a year they'll have I can't think of what they call it, but where they put out information of places where you can return medications. And I always post that so that people will know. I have people ask me that a lot.
How many years ago was it that Jacob passed away?
He died in 2016. So we just had what would have been his 23rd birthday. So yeah, he had gotten into all this stuff and we became sort of like drug experts in that we could tell what Jacob was on by his behavior. It was really bizarre. As I think back now and I think about, I have anxiety issues. And now that I look at a lot of his behaviors, it seems like his drugs of choice were always things that calm you down. The pot, the Xanax, the hydrocodones. And he would just pass out sometimes. We would come in the living room and he's just out cold. And we learned that the Xanax actually can have like this paradoxical effect where he takes it and he's very mellow. And then as it starts to wear off, or if he's taken too much, he would get violent. Wow. And so then we're dealing with this combative kid. Pot would mellow him out. LSD, he was seeing things that weren't there. I mean, it was crazy, the amount of things that he was doing. But he promised me in his teenager brain, Mom, I'll never do heroin or I'll never do meth. I don't know why those were the line, right?
Well, yeah, I think that they realize how dangerous they are. Like my son had a goal to try every drug, but he said he would never shoot heroin because he knew that he probably wouldn't make it if he did that with a needle. And I
was so naive. I thought you had to shoot heroin, but you don't.
No, you don't.
And I did not know that. And actually, we didn't know he was doing heroin. We think he only started it like maybe a couple of months before he passed away, but he would snort it. And I would find these little pieces of foil and I would find stuff, but I did not know. I can't tell you the amount of things I did not know.
Well, it's so hard. You just said something about how you got this education on drugs. I mean, I never used drugs in school. I never thought that I'd raise someone in my family would use drugs, and you just don't know. And then you're naive and you want to believe your son. You want to believe what they're telling you. So you think, well, maybe I'm just making it up in my head. And you have to get so educated so fast, and it's so stressful, and you feel shame. I know.
Oh, and we learned that you can describe some kind of a pill in Google search, and it'll pull up pictures and you can identify drugs. Mm-hmm. We were very good detectives. What we weren't very good at was figuring out what we were supposed to do. Like, what are we supposed to do with him? And you go to Nar-Anon or whatever, these family support groups, and they're like, well, tough love, and you've got to kick him out. Well, that's great. Unless your son's 14 years old, he's a baby. You can't kick a baby out. And he just got involved with all kinds of people and all kinds of things. And it was a nightmare. And then you talk about the shame. Well, as a teacher, I also live in the same area where I teach. So I taught half the kids in this neighborhood. I taught his friends. I taught his dealer. And it's just like, it was so crazy. And you didn't want anybody to know. That whole stigma of, oh, that only happens to other people's kids. That's not going to happen to my kid. And you don't want anyone to know. So you don't tell anybody. And if you don't tell anybody, you can't get help. And if you can't get help, then it just gets worse. It's a terrible, terrible place to be.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. I ended up getting a group of parents together because one of them came by my house looking for my son. And that's a whole nother story. But we decided we're going to kind of get together and communicate. If our kids are communicating, we're going to communicate. It's still really hard. I think there's different people forming different support groups because it always helps to talk to somebody who's been through it. But like you said, every situation's different, and the tough love route doesn't work for everybody. And it's just
or it'll work for a while.
Yeah.
But then he comes back and he's banging on the door. And how do you look at your son and say, you can't come in? It was awful. And I didn't reach out to friends. I found out later that a lot of them knew, but I was just trying to keep it to ourselves. And like we were trying to get him in a rehab. Well, rehabs don't want to take teenagers. There's a liability issue. So what am I supposed to wait till he's 21 until I can put him in a place? And even if I could put him in a place, who can pay for it?
Well, and he's an adult and he's only going to go if he wants to. So what would you recommend to somebody who's going through it right now? Like what, I know it's tough to talk about, but I know hindsight's 2020, but I know that you want to help parents that are going through this now. Right. So what would you recommend to somebody who's in the shoes that you were in several years ago?
Honestly, I would definitely reach out to somebody that's been through it, because like you can go to a therapist or you can go to whatever, but until you can look somebody in the eye and know, oh yeah, they get it. Their child has stolen from them. They've seen their child, whatever. For example, we have people reach out to us through our Facebook page. Long story short, we've done things like talk people through situations. What do I do? Talk them through, because you almost have to handle each situation in a different way and each individual kid and what the drug is. Is this a really dangerous drug, or are they just... And we've driven over to houses and we've talked to kids with their parents there. And we're like, you don't want your parents to go through what we're going through. Definitely not just finding a support group, but finding the right support group. You know what I'm saying? Like you have AA, which even for people with addictions can join those kind of groups. But the Narcanon? Anyway, it was very specific to the opioid.
Narcotics Anonymous.
Yeah, narcotics. Yes. I'm sorry.
Narcotics Anonymous. Yeah. So reaching out and getting help. And then what would you say? I think men and women handle it differently too. So I'm sure you and your husband probably handled things differently or reacted differently. That's got to be so hard on a marriage.
Well, we were in a situation where my husband works out of the house. So he's self-employed. He's a photographer, which is why I have this giant light on my face right now. Mm-hmm. But he had to do a lot of managing Jacob because I was still a teacher. I had got up every morning. I went to school. So at night, I'm trying to peel my son off the ceiling from some LSD trip or whatever, go to bed, get up and go put on my happy face.
Right.
That would be the other thing I would say to people is if you feel confident and you trust people where you work or you trust your friends, you need to trust them with this information. Don't try to keep it to yourself. I mean, I finally exploded one day at work and was crying. And then after that, the person that I yelled at and cried to became one of my biggest supporters. Like I couldn't have made it through what I went through without her.
Well, your son was sick. And it's like if somebody has cancer, people are really supportive, right? You're not ashamed to say my son has cancer and he's having surgery or something, but there's still, and more people are getting over this stigma about the drugs, but there's still that stigma. You know, I had some people tell me that would never happen in my family. We ate dinner together every night. Well,
we did too. We went to church, you know. Yeah. But we have to educate people that it is a sickness of some type, you know, mental, whatever you want to call it. We have to be able to treat these people with respect, but treat them.
Right.
Like he would get in trouble and go to the juvenile detention center. Who's he going to meet in there except somebody else that knows how to get drugs better than he does? There's no help for them there.
How did his sisters handle it?
Well, the older one is a good bit older and she lives in Oregon. And then the second oldest lives in Detroit. So they knew about what was going on and they loved Jacob, but they didn't live with it the way that Savannah did. My 26-year-old, she was living here during a lot of it. You had asked me about my husband and I handling it differently. Siblings do as well. When you have more than one kid, they all have different types of relationships with each other. That's very complicated. But one of the hardest things for me was just watching him fall apart and knowing that trajectory. So while I'm at work, I'm trying to process and put that away, right? My husband's at home trying to chase him down to downtown Atlanta somewhere where he's in some hotel room or trying to make sure he's not overdosed. And the girls would check on him and everything, but Savannah had to witness a lot of it and it's hard. And then after he passed away, it was my Thanksgiving break and I was here by myself and my husband was in Texas and Savannah was in Germany. And
So you were there by yourself in the house with Jacob.
Yeah. And then that was never a good thing because he would try to get away with stuff. And we had a big fight that weekend, and then we got over it because he always said, I love you, Mom. Yeah. And I always told him that is not the question. That's never in question. We all love each other. I'm going to kill you, but we all love each other. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea he was doing heroin. I knew he was really out of it, and I assumed it was Xanax. And the last night that he was here, he had like fallen asleep out on the back deck under a blanket listening to music because he wrote music and listened to music. And I told him to come in. I'm like, Jacob, come in. It's getting dark, and it's cold. He's like, oh, okay, Mom, whatever. And the very last thing he said to me when he came in the house, he smiled at me and looked at me in the living room. And he says, okay, Mom, I'm not high. I'm just tired. And he went up the stairs and did heroin. And the next afternoon, I went in to get him up to go to work, and he was gone. So my friend that I had yelled at work, was here within 2 minutes and stayed with me for about 2 weeks, I think. But I think he maybe had done so much Xanax that he forgot. So maybe he did the heroin. I really don't know. Jacob was just all kinds of questions. The whys, the why us.
Right.
The why now, the why me, the why him, the why whatever. Because one of the things I learned is that with addiction, see, the stigma, I think, comes from people saying, well, they made a choice. They chose to go do that. Well, okay. But let's say 10 kids go out and they choose to try some drug. Well, 8 of them don't ever have to do it again.
Right.
They're done. Oh, that was fun. I'm done with that. But there's 1 or there's 2, and those can't stop. And after a while, their addiction makes the choices for them.
I agree. And then some of them too, they were just prescribed the pills when their wisdom teeth came out, or if they had a football injury or in a car accident.
And we have that too, we think, because Jacob had to have like a tooth that was impacted, cut and pulled down. And that's what the very first time he took hydrocodones, and he was having a great time on those.
Yeah. Some people don't react well to those and don't want to take them at all. Right. And other people have this euphoric reaction. So I think
too, if he really did have anxiety, which I think he did, maybe he was just self-medicating, but whatever the reason, I don't even know that the reason even matters anymore. It's just, he couldn't stop. It was like a freight train. It was just this one and this one and this one and this one. It seemed very fast.
Was he still in high school at age 18?
He had not been going to school.
Okay.
But he was working with this group. It's a group called Hearts to Nourish Hope. And we found them somehow. I don't even know. And they're amazing. And he was working on his GED. They got him a job. So he was washing dishes at Chili's. And he had made a list of things that he needed to do to get himself together. And who knows? I don't know why.
No. So how are you turning that pain into helping others?
Well, after you lose a child, it's a weird thing, like walking around with a giant hole. And there's all different types of child loss. There's a group called Compassionate Friends that works with a lot of families of any kind of child loss. One of the things that we've done, my husband and I have gotten involved in a group called GRASP, which I should know what that stands for. But anyway, it's support for families who have lost someone to a substance issue. And actually, one of the very first people that I met hasn't been a guest on your show, Joy Crow.
Yes.
She lost her 2 sons. But at the time I met her, she was the first mom that I knew that had this happen. And so we became like instant friends. But we work with those groups, and we'd speak to schools, or we speak to individuals, or my husband and I have spoken to nursing students at Clemson, or whoever wants us to speak. We'll go speak. We have our Jacob Story Facebook page, which I try to post links for local help because we're here in Georgia. My husband's on the board for several different organizations. Overdose prevention we work with. We can hook people up with Narcan or Naloxone. Naloxone. We just have kind of put ourselves in the middle of every group around here that's doing anything to help families and help people who are in recovery. We Navigate Recovery is another group that we work with.
How does that help you? Because I mean, doesn't it probably just brings up a lot of the bad memories? So how does it help you helping other people, or does it? I mean, how do you do
It
it?
does. I have to say, right after Jacob died, my husband was on it. He was out, he was doing stuff, and I couldn't. And I finally got to a point where it's hard. Talking about this is hard. It's a trigger, but my push for doing this, my big reason is another thing that happened on Jacob's last weekend with me, which let me just say, I know it sounds horrible, but I am so blessed that I got to spend that weekend with him.
Oh, you are? Yeah.
It's so blessed. I mean, it was horrifying. It's the most horrifying thing that could ever happen and, have PTSD or whatever. But that weekend, he had met some boy. I don't know who it was. Brought him home and he comes in the door and I'm on the computer because I'm always typing. I'm always writing. He's like, Mom, I met this kid. Can I bring him upstairs? He's really upset. I want to talk to him. And I said, no. He's like, come on, Mom, just 10 minutes, whatever, because I can't deal with him.
I know.
So he goes upstairs, closes the door. I go upstairs listening through the door, right, to see if there's a drug deal or if I'm about to get shot or whatever. And he actually is sitting in his bedroom reading to this kid from the Bible. He was very spiritual. So 10 minutes, almost exactly, this kid goes out the front door. Bye. Thanks for, okay. Jacob comes bounding down the stairs and he's like, Mom, I think I really helped that kid. And I said, I'm sure you did, Jacob, whatever. And he goes, I think I can do that. I think I could be a counselor.
Oh, wow.
And his dad and I had talked to him about it because he was really empathetic. He loved people. He never met somebody he didn't like unless they took his drugs or something. But that's why I do it. He can't be the counselor, but I can do my best to do that for him. Oh. Let his story speak to other people.
Definitely. That's awesome.
He was a good boy.
That's awesome. I know for sure that you're helping so many people.
We hope so. Also, there's a drug epidemic awareness walk across America. I want to give a plug to because there's this one lady that has put this huge thing together and she's made banners and there's just hundreds of kids from all over the United States on these banners and there's a Facebook page. So if you look for that drug epidemic awareness walk across America. One of the groups that I belong to, which is not in vain, is a national moms group for overdose. We have our own little segment of it that we put together and we call ourselves Warrior Moms. Anyway, so we're helping to organize this for Georgia. It's coming here in September. Anyway, it's a big deal.
It's so needed. And I to bring awareness, I just can't imagine having gone through COVID with a son or a daughter living at home or not.
He would have been dead because he would have been in and out.
I just can't imagine how hard that is for parents or, and maybe they can't get their kids a bed. They can't get them to rehab because of COVID and everything. So I'm sure that the numbers have gone up.
Yeah, they have.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it was horrifying to begin with, but yeah, COVID has compounded everything. It's just, I can't imagine. I mean, even with us, because our GRASP group, we still meet, but we meet via Zoom, but everybody doesn't come, but it's still nice. And then we have like our Warrior Moms, we've actually met at my friend Kathy's house. We just separate in the backyard, and social distance, but it's important always to have some kind of support. I feel like it has helped me anyway.
During the time, how did you take care of yourself during the time that he was alive and using drugs? And did you take?
I didn't do a very good job.
Yeah.
My husband and I would go to the gym and I would try, but my mental and emotional state, like you could say something to me and I would take it the wrong way. I would be angry or I would cry or I was a basket case, literally a basket case. And then after Jacob passed away, it was like, I have to figure out, I also have to figure out who I am. I'm still a mom. It was hard when people would say, how many kids do you have? And the first time I came across somebody right after he died and they was like, oh, how's your son? And I said, oh, he's fine.
Yeah,
I didn't know what anyone to say.
Yeah, you're caught off guard.
Yeah, but now I tell people I have 4 kids. I'm the mom of 4 kids. And just my son just happens to be in a different place. Him being a very spiritual person, I mean, we feel him around here. I don't feel like he's thousands of millions of miles away unless he wants to be. Maybe he's just in a different, I don't know. What would you call it? Like a different dimension or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
His energy is around you.
Yes, energy.
Feel him. Yeah, I'm sure he's there. I think there's so many things that we can't see and we just don't
You
know.
can feel them.
Yeah, you
can feel them. I still have bad days. I have things that I know are going to trigger me. This conversation, is hard. But since then, I have started doing things. I started doing yoga for COVID, and now I love it. It helps me with my anxiety. It helps me with just getting myself focused. It also helps me be able to move since I just turned 60.
Yeah.
And my husband and I have been hiking. And so we're going to set some goals to do a certain number of hikes. For me, being outside, being outside myself when I'm doing yoga or meditating or reading or any of those things. One of the things I do is write. I have written a book about Jacob, and it was very hard to get it all together because that was very painful.
Did you publish it?
I'm in the process. I'm writing query letters and sending things out. It's edited. It's ready to go. I tell you, that's a full-time job. And
writing it or getting
I know. Right now, I've just got to finish this other job that I'm going to be done with in May, and then I'll have more time. But it's kind of the story of our Jacob and I together, I guess, what we went through. It's got the bad stuff. It's got the good stuff. It has poems in it because I write poetry. That makes me feel better, I guess, just get all that stuff out.
Well, once it's published, share the link with me and I'll add it to the show notes of this episode.
I will. Get
the word out.
And I'm trying to think. I just feel like the support and finding things that you like we were talking about with retirement.
Yeah.
After Jacob died, I had to figure out, who am I now?
Right.
Do I want to sit in a corner and cry,
right,
which some people do? And if that's what works for them, But for me, I had to get out. I had to try to make his life affect other people. I wanted it to have significance. I wanted him to be able to make a mark on the world, I guess. He was going to be famous, he was going to be famous and buy me a house at the beach. But I wouldn't be who I am had I not gone through what I went through with him. And even if it's hard, we just have to do hard things.
Yeah. It's hard to sometimes find a blessing in something that happened, but you can't bring him back. And what you're doing now is counseling and coaching others and doing that in Jacob's name and helping so many people. And by sharing your story on this podcast, sharing his story and in your Facebook group, you're helping people and just helping one person.
A couple of the moms, we are thinking about doing a podcast. So if we get it going,
okay,
we'll let you know. Yeah. But it would be a different focus. It would be sort of like focusing on moms and it doesn't have to be Overdose, but we're talking about it. We think it would be
cool.
Fun.
So if you ever have any questions about how to start like that, let me know.
Okay, because you can be our expert.
I'll be your expert. I'll give you.
Okay.
It's fun. It's definitely fun to do it. I
listen to podcasts all the time. I usually listen to the true crime ones, and those mess me up. So yeah.
There's so many of them out there. A lot of times people who start a podcast, they stop after 7 episodes because
I heard you say that.
Yeah. So it's a pretty big deal to keep on going. So
I can't imagine. And that'll be something else to keep me busy. I'll learn new skills, I guess.
Yeah. It's always fun to learn new things. I've learned so much and you will too. Awesome. Thank you, Tina, for being on the Onward podcast.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening today. Please share this episode with somebody else who needs to hear it. And if you like the Onward podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'd really appreciate it. Just reach out to me. Let me know that you're one of the Onward podcast listeners, one of the Onwarders following this podcast and supporting this show. I'd really love to meet you and get to know you. I can see the statistics when I look at Lisbon, but they're numbers, and I don't always know who's listening. It's awesome sometimes when I meet somebody and they're like, "Oh, I listened to the Onward podcast. I love it." And that happened last March. I was at a government contracting conference and someone came up to me and said that. And it just warms my heart to be able to meet the onwarders, the people that are listening to this podcast. Thank you for your support. Have a great week, everybody.